folks online. So good evening. Thanks everybody for coming. I've given several of you copies, so if anybody else needs a copy, just let us know. But my name is Deirdre Gilbert. I'm the Director of State Marine Policy for DMR, and I'm running this hearing tonight. With me is Amanda Ellis, who's the Director of the Aquaculture Division. Just to be clear, this is the public hearing for Chapter 2, which is the aquaculture regulations. I think we have a few other representatives from DMR who are participating remotely, and if they speak, they'll introduce themselves. But otherwise, we'll just go ahead and get started. I am recording tonight's proceeding, and so that's for the purpose of capturing any comments we receive on the proposed rule. This is an administrative proceeding. I'm going to ask everybody, both in the room and online, to refrain from conversation unless you're called upon to speak. And if you are participating via computer or smartphone, just keep yourself on mute. And if you need to communicate something like a technical issue, you can use the chat, but please don't use the chat to communicate your comments. We'll ask you to come off mute and give your comments on the record when we get to that point of the proceeding. Before we start to take comments, I am going to have Amanda give an overview of the proposed rule, and then after that, we'll move to comments. I know we've gotten a couple questions already, so I think she'll try to address what she knows has been kind of topics of confusion. So anyway, I'll turn it over to Amanda to do that.
So just to summarize some of the key changes, this would create a pre-application meeting requirement for experimental leases. So that means that an experimental lease applicant, the municipality, and DMR would meet prior to the applicant submitting their experimental proposal to DMR for review. Just as a reminder, experimental leases are maybe up to 4 acres in size and are issued for a 3-year term. The proposal would also streamline the sourcing requirements for limited purpose aquaculture LPA applications. Again, just as a reminder, LPAs are annual licenses that expire December 31st each year, but they may be renewed. Their licenses, not leases. The scope of their permitted activities is narrow, and they are evaluated through a permit by rule process. With regard to those sourcing requirements, the proposed regulation would add DMR approved facilities as a source of stock. It's currently limited to approved hatcheries. So approved hatcheries are from Chapter 24 of DMR's regulations, and approved facilities refer to land-based operations that are licensed under 6085. So currently in regulation, DMR approved hatcheries are the only permitted sources for hard clams, Arctic and Atlantic surf clams, and softshell clams, except in cases where DMR issued a permit to collect undersized organisms from the wild. This proposed regulation, it would add razor clams, American oysters, and bay scallops to that list. So razor clams, American oysters, and bay scallops would join the list of organisms that need to come from an approved hatchery. It strikes the language around the permit option for anyone to request the collection of undersized organisms from the wild. The intent was always specific to municipal related work, but that's not required here in Chapter 2. It also clarifies that all of those species that I just listed may be also sourced from a DMR approved facility in addition to an approved hatchery. If a municipal shellfish committee needs to obtain an LPA for their work, they would be subject to those same sourcing requirements unless they received a transplant permit from the department, which authorized the collection of shellfish species that are in their ordinance. So transplant permits are already authorized in Chapter 7 of DMR's regulations, so they don't need to be restated in Chapter 2 of DMR's aquaculture regulations. I know that there was some concern about what this meant for municipalities, but functionally it wouldn't change what they're currently authorized to do. The proposal clarifies that all other authorized species, including marine algae, green sea urchins, blue mussels, and sea scallops, must either be sourced from a DMR approved hatchery or facility or from within the same health area as the LPA site. In cases where stock may come from the wild, and that would be again limited to marine algae, blue mussels, sea urchins, and sea scallops, the application must identify the full name and license number of the individual authorized to collect the respective species from the wild. These sourcing requirements would be reviewed at the time an LPA application is filed and if changes to source of stock are requested at the time of renewal. The updates to sourcing requirements are intended to ensure consistency with current law and that there's a viable source of stock for each LPA application. For example, we've seen many cases where someone will apply and state that they're getting bay scallops from the wild. However, there is no licensing pathway for collection of bay scallops from the wild. Another example is people might list that they're independently going to source the urchins themselves from the wild, but not realize that that fishery is limited entry, so they can't obtain a license to collect themselves. So then that means that they need to find a wild harvester that's willing to sell to them. And so in all those cases, we're spending a lot of time in a back and forth with applicants about what the sourcing landscape looks like. So this is an attempt to streamline that. And then all the other changes in the rule proposal are intended to ensure consistency with existing statute law or current practice.
So we'll move to taking comments. Before I open the record for comments, I just want to explain how that will work. So everyone has one opportunity to provide their comment. I'm going to start with the folks in the room here tonight. If anybody wanted to make a comment, if you're participating by computer or smartphone and you want to make a comment, after we get through anybody in the room, I'll ask you to use the raise your hand feature and I'll call on you when the time comes. And then I'll check. I don't see anybody who dialed in at this point, but if there are folks on the phone, I will check to make sure that they don't want to provide a comment. After you provide your comment, you can leave the proceeding or you can remain to continue listening. However, unless you're giving a comment, particularly for the folks online, you need to keep your devices on mute. And for those participating in person, please don't interrupt or engage in sidebar conversations while anyone else is providing their comment. The comment period itself is not a time for back and forth like with other participants or with agency staff. So if you want to provide your feedback on proposed rule, we'll move to the next person. And, questioning folks who are providing comments and offering rebuttal, all of that is not permitted. So for just further background, the statutory authority for this hearing comes from the State of Maine's Administrative Procedures Act and Title 12, Section 6072, 6072A, 6072B, and 672C of DMR laws. We provided notice of this proposal and the 30-day comment period on January 21 of 2026. And we sent notices to subscribers of the regulations email listserv and industry members who had provided us with an email address for this purpose. And we posted the notice to the website. We also take written comments on proposed rules, and the deadline for comments on this proposal is February 23rd. You can submit written comments via fax, mail, or email, and the information about how to do that is on the front page of the rulemaking package, which is also on our website. At the conclusion of this process, we will take this proposed rule to the DMR Advisory Council for their consideration and vote. We don't have a meeting scheduled at this time, but I anticipate that will be in early March. And just to kind of recap what Amanda explained about what the rule contains based on the brief summary we originally wrote, this proposed rulemaking would require a pre-application meeting for an experimental lease application prior to an experimental application being submitted to the department. It also updates the sourcing requirements for purpose aquaculture licenses to provide consistency with existing regulations, ensure that reliable sources of stock are available for each allowable species, and streamline the LPA sourcing framework. For LPAs, an approved hatchery or facility would be the only authorized source of stock for hard clams, hang clams, Arctic surf clams, softshell clams, razor clams, American oysters, European oysters, and bay scallops. The proposed changes also clarify that green sea urchins, sea scallops, marine algae, and blue mussels may be sourced from either an approved hatchery or facility or within the same health area as the LPA site. And then the proposed rule provides a process for the department to seek clarification from people who provide comments for experimental leases under certain circumstances and makes changes for clarity and consistency with existing law. So with that, again, also, question.
Well, just wondering before you go to the comment, are you going to have an opportunity to ask questions for clarifying questions of the department?
If you do have questions, we can do that. Sure.
It seems like that would be the fitting first place before comments or testimony, right?
Sure.
I don't mean to interrupt. I just don't want you to
about to move to comment. So if you have a question before you can comment, why don't you go ahead with that question?
Sure. Yeah. So in the way the rules are laid out right now for that pre-application meeting, what municipal body specifically is being, given that authority in each town?
So I believe the way that it's currently drafted, I think we go to the harbor master or municipal designee. It's written broadly, so we would contact the municipality and then they could decide though.
So in one town, it could be the harbor commission. In another town, it could be the select board. It could be an executive committee. It could be there's no delineation per town, or how do you decide how that is spread out?
The town would get notice from us that an applicant is needing to schedule a pre-application meeting, and then it would be up to the town to decide who their municipal designee is that's going to participate in the meeting.
And I assume, is it the same process you currently use for standard leases? So it would mirror what we currently do for standards, just for experimentals as well.
Just a quick follow-up to Willie's question. If there's a conflict internally in the town, how does the department deal with that? I realize it's not specified in the rule, but just in general, how would you?
That I'm aware of.
It will.
What do you mean?
I mean, I guess, yeah, I'm just trying to understand, Sebastian, because what we're trying to say is it's the same thing we've been doing for standards without incident. Do you anticipate that experimentals will create a different level?
No, I don't. I'm just saying that I think what we're seeing is there may be a conflict between a harbor committee, a harbor master, or the selectmen internally in a town. And
The town's position on
yeah, and so how does that play out?
It would be incumbent upon the town to resolve that. This doesn't prescribe that the town follow a specific process. It's directing the department to invite the municipality to participate in a pre-application meeting.
So you would take input from a harbor committee and a group of selectmen, and if they conflicted, then you would go back to the town and say, who's speaking for the town, or how would you handle that?
No, the town would be given an opportunity to participate and send a designee. And if they elected not to send a designee and said, we don't want to hold a pre-application meeting or something on this, then that we would continue to move the application forward. We're not prescribing a process that a town has to follow to participate.
So to clarify that would be a single person representing the town, a designee?
It could be a single, sometimes it's a select board member, sometimes it's a harbor master, just depends upon the town.
But it wouldn't be a board, it would be a single person.
I'm unaware that a full board has participated in a pre-application meeting.
So to clarify on the municipal portion of this, so for example, my plan is to grow out quahogs to beyond the size of predation for green crab, then transfer that seed to the town to be planted. Is there going to be a change in that, or is you're talking about a standard form of transfer? Is that something that already exists, so that won't change at all if I were to do something like that?
Currently, hard clams are already part of the rule, so that part of it is not changing, and we're not anticipating any changes to how municipalities get sources for their LPAs.
or for their flats.
Or for their flats. Correct.
Yeah, so they'd be essentially, I guess, to use the word purchase from me. So I'd be getting the seed at 1 to 2 millimeter, growing them out to 14 plus, and then transferred to the town for municipal planting. for, licensed harvesting. That's what I'd be doing. So there would be no change as far as what's going on now.
The way that the rule is written, it applies to when you're submitting your application. It's not following source of stock after it's grown out. So at the time you apply, you would need to list cohogs from an approved hatchery. If a town is applying for an LPA, they could do one of two things. They could either list an approved hatchery like they currently are required to do, or get transplant permits to source from the wild.
Yeah, so I'm a private LPA and I do have that in my application to grow. I'll be growing them in lantern nets. And then once they hit that size, then they would go to the town.
There's no,
So nothing is changing in
Right.
regard
No
to the
change.
town obtaining seed in that manner or
if they
deployment.
wanted to.
That's a sensitive one. So if a farm has a nursery and they're raising shell stock from seed to a plantable size for a municipality to sell, there's a lot of research going on this right now with GMRI and Manomet. Would that prohibit the farm because it's not coming from an approved facility if it was going in the same health area?
So, I feel like what might be happening is people are applying this really broadly to activities that happen like after their initial application is granted. And so all this is currently doing is adding, it's adding oysters, bay scallops, and razor clams. And it's saying you have to source them from an approved hatchery as well. That's like fundamentally the only change that's happening in that landscape. It's not affecting things that happened after that.
Tracking. So if we get our seed for whatever it's basically all species except like the algae stuff now from an approved source, either one of the new approved sources or a hatchery, and it goes on to a lease or an LPA, it can still be that LPA or lease could be listed as a seed supplier to another LPA or lease in that same health area and moved still as it currently can. Because like if you have a lease and LPAs or multiple LPAs right now, all you have to do is lease the other acronyms that you have in the same health area and you can move product between places. Can we still do that under the new?
Move, it's not affecting the movement of product. It would, like someone couldn't come in, and they haven't been able to do this because this is current law. Someone, for example, right now couldn't come in with an application for an LPA and say, I am getting cohogs from another LPA. They can only come from approved hatcheries as a source of stock.
Well,
That's current law, that's not changing.
And an LPA, and we have both are listed as seed sources on each other, and we can move stuff back and forth under the current rules. Would that change?
That's not consistent. That's not currently, I'm telling
Our application and approved lease lists those LPAs and leases as approved seed sources for that other site. So if that's not consistent with the law, it is what is legally in the lease agreement and those LPA decisions.
Well, yeah, I think what we would want to check is, does your LPA license at the time of that application, did you say you were getting the seed from your lease?
Yeah, that's in the operation.
Yeah, it shouldn't. I mean, what we're doing here too is ensuring again that things are consistent with current and existing law. So once this goes into effect, and we've been applying it that way for at least the last year, you can look online at our LPA applications, and we do ask to make sure there's a whole block section off of where clams are coming from, because it's all clam species. I'm not sure. So if you were doing oysters, it wouldn't have applied at the time either. But we're going to carry this forward if this rule takes effect as drafted. But currently, all clam species. We're not proposing to change that.
Well, it sounds like we're not going to be allowed to move oysters to an LPA from a lease after this rule, as it's written, is passed.
It's not impacting the movement of product. It's impacting what you can list for a source of stock. So if someone came in for LPAs,
What you can list for a source of stock for an LPA.
Right, but our lease is listed as the source of stock for our LPA.
For oysters?
Yeah.
Yep, that's currently fine.
But that
This would be, if this regulation takes effect, someone would need to come in, and when they applied for American oysters, they would need to come from an approved facility or hatchery.
LPAs, we're no longer going to be allowed to move oysters from our lease to our LPA.
You can move product. It's not, you'd still be able to move
list it as a
product.
source.
Right? That doesn't make
It
sense.
doesn't make any sense.
That's like
Because it's
mutually
not a source,
You
exclusive.
can't move it from there. That's the way it was always explained to us in these applications prior.
Yeah, we're not like, again, just to clarify, it's applying to the initial sourcing, not movement.
Okay, maybe I get it now. So if the lease gets seed from an approved source,
Yes.
then we can move it to our LPAs after the fact, and that won't change. As long as the initial source is an approved source. Is that what you're saying?
For your LPA, you could, if you have existing LPAs that already exist and you want to move oysters to them, you can. The distinction would be if you came in after this rule passed and you applied for a new LPA and you said, I'm getting it from, you wouldn't be able to do that.
Getting it from what?
Anything
From
other?
another LPA or another lease.
From yourself.
So from myself, so after this, if we applied for another LPA, we would not be able to take product that came from a hatchery to the lease and then went to an LPA? Is that correct?
Yes, because on your new application, you're not listing an approved hatchery or facility.
Wow, that's a
Okay, so
substantial
it
change.
took a while to get there, but that's exactly what we thought it was going to be. So that's a huge change. Yeah. Can we ask what the justification for that is?
It was to ensure that LPAs, the shellfish sourcing, is consistent with existing and current law. It's to streamline sourcing requirements and to make sure that there are viable sources of stock for all species. For LPA applications only. This isn't impacting leases. Leases go through a completely different review process, but LPAs, where they are annual licenses that expire December 31st each year, the department is trying to streamline what the sourcing requirements are for those particular sites.
Okay. But if the goal is to keep it consistent, I would suggest adding language to examples.
So then we're getting to comments, so just wait till it's time for comments.
Amanda, you had mentioned a statute that approved facilities. Can you just repeat that statute, that state statute?
It's 6085, it's land-based
Land-based.
facilities.
Is land, yeah, the land-based
Land-based
aquaculture
aquaculture.
facilities.
Has there been consideration of how that would then affect the potential proposal to have, upwelling specific, FLUPSI specific LPAs? Are you now going to be growing, you're going to be taking product right to a future potential LPA out of with an upweller, and you're not going to be able to sell to someone or transfer to an LPA off of an LPA that is now licensed as an upweller?
LDA,
LPA.
are you talking about LD 2025? Because LD 2025 is creating a new license for husbandry and upwelling activities, so that's currently under development.
So it wouldn't be an LPA, I guess.
Yeah.
You're saying it wouldn't be an LPA?
It wouldn't be an LPA. It'd be just.
And that licensure would not fall under this because it's not an LPA?
We'd have to do separate rulemaking for that.
Question back on you.
Yeah, so in the case of someone that has a lease and they need to use an LPA to work on oysters on a dock or something like that, how would you be able to source that? So you're taking oysters from your lease and you're working on them on a separate dock somewhere that's an LPA, right? Workspace.
Are you leaving them there or?
Working on them and taking them back. Yep. And it,
There's I
but
wouldn't.
in that case, that LPA that you'd have to source, that you would have to do everything on that float so you could not source that stock from your lease.
So you couldn't list for a new LPA,
Right.
for a new LPA license, you couldn't list that you're getting something from a lease. LD 2025 is also creating a separate license from LPAs that would address like your ability to operate equipment and move like product in the scenario that you're describing. There's a new license that's currently being created to address that. That is separate from like the culture activities that are authorized under an LPA.
I just want to check with folks online, or if anybody online has questions of this nature.
I think my question goes along with what's already been asked, but I just want to clarify for my own personal edification here. So I have an experimental lease that I'm applying for a standard right now. One of the issues I have is depuration, moving oysters to a different area before sale. And my plan is to apply for an LPA to serve as a depuration in a different area of Casco Bay so that I can move oysters from a lease to an LPA for a period of time and then harvest off of that LPA. Would this bill then make that like an untenable plan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
So just a follow-up question, Deirdre, before you go back so just to make, I'm listening to all this. When you say new LPA, every year is renewed annually. So is an existing LPA, when it's renewed annually, qualifies a new LPA?
We're not going to go back and do a review of all of the sourcing for all of the LPAs that are out there and currently exist. So we would apply this. So at the time that a new, meaning the LPA has never existed, someone's coming in, it would be reviewed under these requirements. And the only time it would get re-reviewed again for one that is trying to be renewed is if someone came to us and said, I'm changing my source of stock, which is the only allowable amendment, and then said, I'm changing my stock to something that was not approved.
Thank you.
That would also be triggered by change.
I'm just going to let a few folks online ask questions. Mike Gaffney, you have your hand up. Can you unmute yourself, Mike? If you can't, I might be able to do it for you. If I go. I can't seem to unmute you, Mike. I don't know if you can see a microphone that you can unmute. No. And none of us are lip readers. I don't think. Sign readers.
How about now?
Right now is great. Now we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm speaking to the issue of movement of adult oysters, juvenile adult oysters, between a lease and an LPA. And some people do that, I think, to change their taste before they go to market. In our case, our lease is in an area that ices over in the winter. And to sell our oysters through the winter, we need to move some of our market size oysters to an ice-free location. And that is where we have a couple LPAs. So again, it has to do with the definition of sourcing. Of course, all of our oysters come from approved hatcheries, but we move some at the end of the fall to an LPA, two LPAs, so that we can access them and sell through the winter. And I'm just wondering, this is all explained in our application that was approved for our LPAs. I thought we were legal. Are we going to continue to be legal to do that?
If you, again, Mike, if those LPAs already exist and they're subsequently renewed, that's fine. It's just if you came in with a new application for a new site and said that you wanted to source from a lease, you could not do that as proposed.
So just let me paraphrase and confirm what you're saying, or if you could confirm. So you're saying you're sort of grandfathering existing LPAs or farmers that have leases and existing LPAs can move their stock back and forth between the two, and they're not going to come afoul of the new rule. It's for new LPAs that this rule will apply. Is that correct?
Yes, but I want to clarify, like, again, it's not like part of this is it would be for new applications, but also it's not prohibiting like activities that occur after an LPA is granted.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand that.
I'm going to try and see if Amanda agrees with how I'm trying to characterize it. But at the time an LPA is applied for, the department is just trying to make sure there is a source of stock.
Yes.
It's not in and of itself saying there can never be a different
source. Right. Right. Correct. So because we have also no way, there are over 600 LPA sites statewide. We get consistently over 100 new applications every year. And I'm sure like people would like to be able to say, well, it's coming from my lease, but those programs are done entirely separately. And there'd be no great way for the department to check and verify, in fact, like, yeah, okay, it's coming from the lease, it backtrack, make sure that it's from an approved hatchery and that sort of thing. What it is doing is saying at the time that anybody submits a new LPA application to the department, are you sourcing from an approved hatchery or facility? If you are, and your license meets the requirements, fine, you'll get that LPA. And then anything else that you're doing with that LPA, that like with your own legal product, that's fine. It's just at the time that you make an application, we want to make sure that you have a viable source of stock listed.
That doesn't require research on our part.
That doesn't require research on our part. And we recognize like LPAs, I think the use of LPAs, they were always intended to be their annual licenses, just a short-term project to try to see if an area worked. But we are well aware that people now are wanting to use them. They use them for all kinds of different purposes. Some of those purposes, which we heard about today, aren't specific necessarily to just culture. And so the department simultaneously is developing another license under LD 2025 that would include, wouldn't be part of LPAs, it'd be an entirely new license that people could get that is more reflective of those activities outside of kind of the culture of marine organisms.
Under this new licensing, would we be able to have 4 LPAs and then have a work area? So instead, like now we need to, if out of the 4, you would need to use 1 for a work area and 3 for culturing. With this new thing, would we be able to do 4 for growing and then this new thing for working? Would that be?
I mean, we still need to do like, it's a proposed bill before the legislature. So it's all pretty tentative, but yeah, currently for that bill, there's no prohibition on what you're describing. So.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't count against LPAs. It doesn't have a limit in and of itself, that license type. So, but as Amanda said, that will all kind of depend on what ultimately passes into the law. Let me take Cameron, Barner.
Could I just, I'm going to sign off here in a minute, but I just wanted to summarize my comment, and that is.
Mike, we're just taking questions right now, so we moved into the comment period. I'll call on you shortly. Cameron, did you have a question?
Yeah, so sorry to keep sort of clarifying the same thing, but I feel like I think I can summarize it in a way that might make sense to others as well. So if I understand it correctly, you guys are really harping on the words like sourcing and where you're listed or that source, right? So if I apply for a new LPA that I maybe plan to move oysters from my standard lease to that new LPA, I would still list the approved hatchery that those are coming from initially, because I am tracking them back to that approved hatchery and maintaining that source, even though it wasn't the first place in the water that it hit, kind of thing. Does that make sense? Or is that also not approved under the new, under what this would be.
Yeah, we would want to make sure, I think more or less, Cameron, I think you did. I think that the distinction though is like, we definitely would want to make sure that it complies with the sourcing requirements. So that's what we're going to do when we get a new application in. We're going to look and check and make sure that it's coming from an approved hatchery or facility. Yeah, more or less what you're saying.
Okay. Yeah, so I would list the hatchery where I know all my seed is coming from. It might go to my standard lease first, and then I would then move it to the LPA. But as long as I know that was initially sourced from an approved hatchery, and I can show that, then that might comply.
Yep, because you're listing on your application, you're verifying that it's coming from an approved hatchery. So
yeah, okay, great, thank you.
And, sorry, Todd. Again, just questions at this time, but if you have a question.
Yeah, mine was similar to Cam's. I guess my confusion is between the words moving, sourcing, and I guess what I would call seed or seeds from an approved hatchery. So my LPAs are all existing. I traditionally do move oysters between them for a lot of different reasons. Both just managing, the occupation within my site is a big part of moving them around, and to Mike's part, getting to market. But all of my seeds originate with an approved nursery. Can I move between the LPAs freely? Yes or no?
Can they move between?
yeah, you already have authorized LPAs and you documented that. That's fine.
He said nursery, not hatchery. So just.
Yeah, I'm not growing any seed from larva or anything. I think most of us are buying our seeds from an approved nursery. So I think the sensitivity here is primarily around moving between leases and LPAs for very practical raising issues. So I guess sourcing and moving seem to be difficult words for me, and I think maybe for some of the others. I don't want to speak for anybody. So yes or no, in a new or my existing LPAs, am I allowed to move, as Mike used, juvenile or more adult oysters, not the seed I started with, but they originated in a hatchery between my facilities?
Yeah, the distinction is sourcing on a new application. So as long as they're sourced from an approved hatchery, you're all set. It's not applying to movement of product.
And then if they come into that new location from an approved nursery, I can move them elsewhere.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. I'm just going to mute you for the time being, Mike, until we get to comments for folks online. Okay, another question?
Yes. So I'm curious. So I would like to grow in the intertidal cohogs on an LPA, and these would be in bags, mesh bags. And what we've learned through some experiments that Manomet has been doing in Brunswick is that these bags will recruit other cohogs and then also soft shell clams. And this is a really beautiful thing that you can protect the soft shell clams within these bags that are because otherwise, they settle all around, but then they're immediately eaten by green crabs. So what, an LPA could do in this case would be to protect those soft shell clams that settle from the wild set. But it sounds like this might not be allowed under the way it's written right now.
So we're not actually changing anything for cohogs. So if you wanted to do that, you would need to list an approved hatchery as the source of stock for cohogs.
And then for the soft shell clams that might settle?
And you'd have to have soft shell clam on there.
Gotcha.
From an approved hatchery. That hasn't changed.
Yeah. And then if there wasn't, like if DEI, for example, decided to not do a soft shell clam spawn, then we'd be out of luck in that case.
Or if there were no other
hatcheries.
There were no other hatcheries that offered it.
And same thing for cohogs, right? If no one was spawning cohogs that year.
Correct, but that's been like that in regulation for a while.
Gotcha.
Question.
Yeah, I'll take it back to the pre-application meetings. So I see in here that it does list designees. So technically it could be a group of people, right? It's not limited. If it says designees, it could be the entire select board. If that town decided they wanted to have it at a town meeting, you could have it at a town meeting. I know that you're looking back retroactively, but looking forward, this is very specific language giving municipalities a seat at the table. And I'm trying to understand what it is you envision the municipal, they don't necessarily have a say at the end of the day. So they're being given a place in line, but it seems to be broadening that, right? By listing them under B there as the purpose of this meeting shall be for the applicant to explain their proposal to the municipality. Does DMR administrate that, or does the town administrate that? Are you the ones moderating that meeting, or is the town moderating that meeting?
So just to respond to a couple of things, like this has been a requirement for standard leases for, I think, at least over a decade.
Oh yeah.
But not with specific language, because this is new language.
Just a signature from the harbor master.
This is all new language underlined, correct?
A and B that is underlined is new language, but 1, 2, and 3 is existing language that's being struck. Are we both looking at page 6?
Correct, but I'm just saying, B is not language that's been in place for 10 years. B is specific new language that's been written.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the similar text 4B was that it was for the applicant to introduce the proposal to the municipal officers and the department. Now it's explain their proposal to the municipality and for the municipality to provide feedback on the proposal as it relates to the decision criteria.
So they're providing feedback prior to a lease hearing as it relates to the decision criteria.
Right.
Prior to so what we're doing is we're extending this to experimental leases, which prior to this change there was no contact with the town. And it's the only type of proposal that for a new site that doesn't have any contact requirement. And the town of Harpswell formed a working committee to evaluate the aquaculture review process and requested kind of out of the work that they were doing an opportunity to do that because it can save applicants a lot of time. So what's happening is an experimental lease application would come in, they'd submit their proposal. The first time anybody sees it or hears about it is when it goes out for public comment. And then hearing requests come in and the department has to hold a public hearing. A lot of times, like in Harpswell's experience, they had shared that it's unfortunate that the system is currently like that because a lot of the problems could be resolved with a conversation prior to someone applying. So this is adding that requirement to experimental leases that has existed for decades for standards and just cleaning up some of the.
This language is identical to the provision under the standard, right? You haven't changed anything in language.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you have it in front of you, Sebastian?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so on page 6, you can see it's been restructured. So the language isn't identical, but the intent is the same. Right? I mean,
Yes.
there's nothing.
The intent is
Which
exactly.
paragraph are you referring to?
Sorry, at the top of page 6
Yeah.
of 39.
Yeah. That you're talking about, the just first paragraph there?
Well, I'm not, I don't know what you mean, but I'm talking about it. But so it's saying now, the applicant must attend a pre-application meeting with DMR staff, and DMR staff will invite a designee of the municipality to participate in the meeting. It used to say that the purpose of the meeting are 1, 2, and 3. That's been restructured and rephrased to A and B, but the point of that has not changed from the department's perspective.
What if I could ask then, is the reason to change it from 1, 2, and 3? If you state that they have to introduce the proposal to municipal officers, what was wrong with the wording in number 1? Why does that have to become B? Why are those two things being If you're deleting one, but you claim you're adding the same language restated in B, why are you doing that?
I think for clarity,
Yeah.
honestly, I mean, I think the intent was to provide greater clarity about what is supposed to happen at that meeting. Right now, it says for the applicant to introduce the proposal to the municipal officers, and then 2 says for the applicant to gain local knowledge from the municipal officers. So it's kind of like you present your proposal, the town provides the feedback. That is what we are trying to say with A.
Correct.
So for standard leases, it matches the 1, 2, 3 wording.
Yeah.
It has been 1, 2, and 3. It would, both standards and experimental would change to A and B. I think there's another question online. I'm sorry, Jacqueline.
Yeah, I had a question related to that same proposal with the pre-application hearing, the pre-application meeting. You go through in section A things that the potential applicant needs to propose during this meeting. My question for the department is there anything I guess the department does during that meeting that would take a look at without a scoping session or any type of site visit, to take a look at the site as it exists on that day to ensure, should I go through with a proposal or an application, that the integrity of my site or proposed site remains consistent or the same pursuant to those qualifications or conditions that we need to meet.
I mean, I'm not entirely sure, Jacqueline, I understand what you're asking, but if at the pre-application meeting, it's really a conversation between the town and the applicant prior to an application even being submitted. So the applicant shares their tentative ideas with the town, and the town provides feedback on that then the applicant can either take and consider prior to applying, or, if they didn't want to take the advice of the town, that can happen too. And then the other thing, like a site visit, a hearing if necessary, that would occur after the pre-application meeting to ground truth.
Sure, I guess I can rephrase this a little bit. So I'm sitting here during my pre-application meeting. I'm proposing X, Y, and Z. We're talking about the conditions that I would have to meet to successfully apply for a lease site. In that period before the meeting and submitting my application, what if that lease site changes? I guess if I go into the meeting, there's no docks, there's no piers, there's no moorings. Before I submit my application, suddenly something appears. Is there anything done to take a look at that site when I proposed it to ensure that it remains consistent, or looking at, hey, I put people on notice and suddenly things have changed with respect to my proposed site?
No, there wouldn't be an assessment done at the time a pre-application meeting is held. But those are things that you could raise in the course of later on in the leasing process.
Okay, thank you.
Another question.
Yeah, I just want to be clear. So during that meeting, they're not just providing general feedback, right? It's only as it relates to the lease decision criteria. The town can't just be like, you're only getting feedback on exactly what would be in the lease decision criteria, not, oh, we don't like this.
I mean,
Feelings.
we can't. This is trying to articulate like what the purpose of the meeting is, and to communicate that it's really an opportunity to share any concerns as they relate to the lease decision criteria. And that's what, applicants should be taking into account as well. But we can't prevent people from saying things.
But if they did, would that hinder the process? If they said things that weren't related to this, that hinder okay. Another question is, What if you're like in a town where people don't like aquaculture, where let's just say the harbor master doesn't like aquaculture and all the town is against it, and you say, hey, we want to have a meeting with you, and they're like, we're not going to have a meeting with you guys, then where does that leave the applicant?
Yeah, the way that the language is worded, I think it says, invite, or I can't remember how,
Okay.
the opportunity to participate. So it's not requiring it. So if a town said, we're not participating because of, we don't like aquaculture, we would accept the proposal and move it forward.
And then how long does this add to the process?
I mean, theoretically, it should be done before someone starts applying or putting pen to paper. And so typically, it takes from the time we get a request to when we have one, it depends. It can take 30 to 45 days to get something scheduled, depending upon people's availability. But
Is there a set time for that? What if the town says, yes, we would love to meet with you in 3 years?
I mean, we would.
That sounds ridiculous, but
yeah, I mean,
if they were stalling out and putting buoys out and doing sabotage.
A quarterly meeting. I mean, a lot of things meet on a loping schedule that if you miss one, there's no space on the next agenda, they're going to push you 6 or 9 months down the road.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not seeing towns do that at all. And I think, but if something like that did happen, the department would, use its discretion and.
The town is an invite, but not a mandatory thing.
Correct.
Just an invite.
Okay.
Can I just ask one more clarifying question on the seed sourcing? So if you're operating a lease, an approved DMR lease, you have to list your approved sources of seed. And you have LPA owners and other folks in your area that use you as an intermediary nursery to bring their seed up to stock so they don't have to nurse it at that small stage of life. It sounds to me like this would stop that business plan, correct? Unless, hear me out, all of the LPA people said, we communicate with those folks and we say, let's put on your Muscungus Bay aquaculture, because that's where we're going to source our seed from. That shut us down from doing that. Or Ken has a problem, say he has a high mortality event, and he's like, oh no. And we say, oh my God, we're overstocked. And Ken, we have this much seed product. I'm just saying, it could work in reverse, right? We have this. Can we transfer that to him at that point?
I'm just going to clarify, we're not looking at movement. We're not looking at transfer. We're looking at source
At your time of
at the time you apply.
Yeah, but
So we're not
Yeah. Can I ask a follow-up question on that then? So you have a brand new LPA, and the whole purpose of the LPA is to take product from the lease and bring it down to finish it off there. So that inevitably the lease is the source of that whole point of that LPA.
if you listed that lease as a source of stock on a brand new LPA application,
You can't do it.
it would get turned around and rejected because it's not compliant with sourcing requirements.
But you're a hatchery first and your.
Or you just have to list one of the 4 centuries
And just do whatever you
take
want.
seed from wherever you want.
Yeah.
That sounds like what is being said here.
Right.
Sounds
Your
like
hatchery
possible
and
grants
that's
for clarifying questions. I know you're.
Yeah, I mean, I think,
Comments versus-
I think we have done our level best to clarify. So if it remains unclear, then I feel like your comments should say,
Okay.
this is what I need to do. And if this rule prevents me from doing it, I have a problem with it because I don't think we can answer it any better than we have tried. And there are some other staff on, so if any other DMR staff person wants to weigh in, let me know. But Greg, did you have a question that you need clarified before you can comment?
It was related to this same issue, and you said just submit a comment, so I'll do that.
Yeah. At this point,
Thank you.
just if you tell us, this is what, this is why it matters to me, and this is what I need to be able to do. And if this rule would impede that, then I object to it. Then I think that will be the most helpful thing that we can here to clarify that.
Can I ask a question on a totally different subject? Yeah, so can I ask the department why in the briefing, the email notification, and the justification, there was absolutely no mention of the changes being made to the emergency lease provisions?
Which are substantial.
It would have been covered in the bottom, like those are supposed to be, those are supposed to be a brief summary of key changes, and then the entirety of the rule is given to people to take a look at. The changes that are being made to the emergency lease are to be consistent with statute, which was covered in the last couple sentences of the brief statement.
So that's meant to be the one sentence that says it is also intended to provide consistency with existing law. That's it. So the department doesn't need to have any justification listed for those changes.
The summary is to be a justification. The summary is just to say this is what it's.
So for the justification, though, you don't have to provide any justification.
At the time of adoption, we provide a basis statement that says what we're doing, but the rulemaking proposal does its best to say this is what's within this document. We provide the actual language, and then we take comments on it. So
is there a recognition that it's a pretty substantive change to not even mention the word? You could say, to align, emergency leases with existing law. But it seems very misleading to leave out an entire subject.
By definition, I think if we're saying it's consistency with existing law, we're trying to make it comply with law. We wouldn't really have anything otherwise, right? Like something shouldn't not comply with the law.
I'm not questioning the grounds of making the change. I'm questioning the grounds of the notification.
Could we ask for that explanation of what that change is for? Because it doesn't actually seem like it's to bring it in to be consistent. It seems like it's to actually move it further away from the intent of the law. What that part of chapter 2 is.
It's pulling it back in to be consistent with statute. The regulation goes beyond, in some instances, beyond what statute says. So statute controls where those two would conflict. So we're cleaning up language to make it consistent with what statute already says.
And again, if you don't think it is, then provide that as a comment. That's really the.
Well, I get that side of it. I'm really looking for just the framework of understanding why, if that's a substantive change that wasn't brought up in the briefing or the justification.
We don't think it's a substantive change. We think it's a clarification.
Okay, that's all I needed to hear.
For what it's worth, when we provide this summary to the Secretary of State's office, they print it in 5 newspapers, and we pay for the cost of that ad. So we're always trying to make it as concise as we can.
Sure, but there's an entire, multiple paragraphs listed about, seed sourcing and listing things, but it's 3 words. That's all I'm getting at.
Whole paragraphs. It's all one paragraph.
Okay, sorry. Yep, I get it.
Okay, I think we have the idea. There are plenty of comments. So I do want to move into taking those comments. And I mean, sometimes when we have these hearings, people think because they asked a question, we know that they have an issue, but we really do want at this point, like we're going to open the record for comments, and we want to get your comments on the record about what are the things that, again, create an issue for you and how you would like to see those things changed. So like I said, I'm recording. Oh, are there still questions online? I see Greg and Mike's hands are up, but are those with questions? Oh, great. Okay, so I'm going to start with the folks in the room. And the process is just for you to come forward to this table. I'm recording on my computer. I'm also going to just make sure I've got a backup recording. Just come forward, give us your name, and then whatever your comment is on the rule. Like I said, just one opportunity per person. If you think of other things after tonight, you can submit written comments. So we accept those until February 23rd. So basically another beyond 10 days after this hearing. So I don't want to make the first comment. Okay, great.
Hi, my name is Jesse Roche from Westport Island. I have 4 LPAs. I'm in a very fast growing area. I can get in 4 months what other farms take 2 years to grow. which provides a good opportunity for me to grow for other LPAs, other farmers who may be in a very slow growth period. I think this law is going to hinder that in order for me to use that as a business model to possibly take my fast growing oysters and then move them to other people's LPAs who are having trouble with that growth. The intention already, which is on my lease, is to grow out quahogs for municipalities to then seed, which from what I understand isn't changing other than the transfer paperwork. But my comment is that I think there should be a path forward. Like, yes, I'm getting my seed from a licensed, approved hatchery. From there, I'd like to grow it to a certain size and then be able to sell it to other LPAs. It might not be a big thing now, but I also like to develop this possibly into a standard lease or something to make bigger down the road. I feel like this is going to hinder that. So my comment is at least give us a path forward to make a move like that.
And I'm sorry, I cut Jesse. What's your last name?
Roche, R-O-C-H-E. Thanks.
Anyone else in the room?
Sure. Eric Maransky, I would agree with that there needs to be options to allow small scale operators to bring seed in and then move it to other growers, other farmers, other LPAs, leases, in a way that doesn't cut people's business models off at the knees. I worry that the additional language on the experimental lease application is going to create an opportunity for home rule politics in towns, which is going to, I know there have been cases where municipal employees have gone out and sort of staged moorings that weren't there in proposed sites in order to sabotage that. And then on the language around emergency leasing, I would comment that emergency leases are not experimental leases or standard leases or LPAs. They are very explicitly, clearly for purposes of unforeseen circumstances. And to say that language in there, which would effectively remove the viability of an emergency lease from a grower by saying that if the department can determine it can be managed without moving it, you no longer apply, that's incredibly subjective and undermines the entire purpose of an emergency lease, which is to allow an existing operation to protect public health and protect their business interests while whatever investigation needs to be done is done and things are figured out. Also, the language which removes the ability to extend it beyond 6 months undermines that effort as well. And that it basically gives the department carte blanche to say, we don't like what you're doing. We're going to say you have to do this now, whether that's financially viable or logistically or technically viable isn't our problem. And you're now going out of business. Thank you.
Eric?
Can't make the drive for nothing and not say anything. Dan Devereaux, I am the coastal resource manager for the town of Brunswick. My family also is a co-owner of Muir Point Oyster Company. One thing that scares me about this language is right now there's a lot of research and a lot of effort into going into how do municipal shellfish programs work with farmers to increase their wild shellfish stock.
And when you say this language, I just want to make sure you're talking about the sourcing.
You're talking about the sourcing in the LPA. I don't have much concern with either of other changes. But we worked so hard to sort of figure out a process where we can work with farmers, and we've worked on that social sort of licensing with clammers and things like that. It feels like the way that this is written, and you can see from the questions that were asked, and we're not doing this to be a pain in the butt. We're doing this because this does impact bottom lines, and it impacts not only the cultured industry, it also impacts the wild industry. So that's my concern. And if this has any way of prohibiting that would definitely be an impact to the municipal shellfish program. Also an impact to farmers who researchers have been working with to grow seed on their farms and then transfer it over to municipalities. So those are my comments, but I do appreciate you guys doing all this work for trying to get clarification and to straighten up the rules. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Max Burtis, and I'm a Brunswick shellfish harvester and also an oyster farmer. And just the way the wild shellfish seed sets have been going, it hasn't been looking good. There's some ups, there's some downs, but I think it's generally down. And I think I'm also on the vice chair of the Shellfish Committee in the town of Brunswick. And one thing that I think we might have to turn to in the future is using aquaculture and LPAs as a tool to really protect the wild seed sets that we get. And I do worry about, if hatcheries in the future decide to, maybe it's not economical for them to, to produce soft shell clams or hard shell clams, where that puts us from, a town perspective, if we're using aquaculture as a management strategy, and a way to preserve the seed that we see coming in from the wild. And so, that's one of my concerns with this language, and I'm not positive about all the specifics, but it would be great if we could plan for using the LPAs to protect wild seed in the future, regardless of if there's an approved hatchery that year or not. Thank you.
Hey guys, Ken Sparta from Freeport. I started a plant there, and I'm also a town councilor. My biggest concern is that, like, you've given us a way to apply for a new LPA that we're not intending to put new seed on, by basically misstating that the seed is coming from X and getting the LPA. And it just seems like a mistake to me to be asking for information that isn't actually real. Just so that we can get our LPAs. I appreciate that you've given us that workaround, but it doesn't make sense to me. If what we're looking for is actual good, solid information for your department to make decisions, knowing how we're going to be using the leased space or the licensed space, I think, is the real information that you want.
My name is Andrew Buckner from Westport. I have 4 LPAs, and I also work at a commercial oyster farm. I'm opposed to any rule change that increases municipal government's involvement in aquaculture. Where I live in Westport, we already see select boards overstepping, asking us to go in and meet with them and talk about how our LPAs are done and stuff like that. Towns are currently bombarded with misinformation from anti-aquaculture groups. I feel that they should be further removed from the process and not more involved. Although I do agree that it's important for everybody to get their opinions in and stuff like that. We are dealing with ridiculous things at certain towns. There are no public scoping sessions for other industries of any kind, and they already have all these different types of things. So are we setting precedent by letting towns come to meetings like this? Will they start expecting notices for lobstering or for pogies or anything else, new licenses? I would prefer that remains with DMR. We're the experts in this subject. So I would like less town involvement and if anything, them being removed from it more. For the seed thing, sourcing, corporate seed monopolies and innovation is what I call that. Mandating that LPA seed come from only approved hatcheries risks handling a monopoly to a few large corporations. This could potentially kill competition and allows big players to dictate pricing and prevents small farmers like me from innovating with our own stock. If biosecurity is the concern, I would suggest an opt-out for farmers who complete a state required transfer training or something like that. We should be giving, as others said, some sort of way. And then finally, the obvious confusion about going from a lease to an LPA, the way it's all worded is extremely concerning. I agree with what Ken said, that just because we say something on our application, we should just be able to tell the truth of what we're doing. And like, I guess this came from this stock. I don't know anybody that grows oysters that doesn't get it from an approved hatchery as it is. So I'm a little confused to see oysters on here too. I mean, ultimately it's coming from that stock. So even if a person gets an oyster from somewhere else, it originated at one of those 3 hatcheries. So I'm not really sure. That's it. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Willie Leathers, and I'm a co-owner of Main Ocean Farms, operating lease CIS RC2 and various LPA sites in Casco Bay. I've been in the aquaculture industry for 10 years, forming this business and applying for our first licenses in 2016. And over that time, I've watched diligently how this industry has developed and grown to provide positive economic and environmental impacts on our local communities and the state at large. It's fostered a strong and hardy workforce that bolstered the Maine seafood brand and legacy. At the same time, I watched as the Department of Marine Resources shifted away from being a trustworthy watchdog of public health and environmental stewardship, focused on their underlying goal of regulating, while duly promoting the growth and prosperity of our waterfront industry, to being a bullish, non-scientific, process-based, and adversarial body, operating with a blatant bias and disdain for the very industry that they should nurture and support. The changes proposed in this rulemaking reek of that underlying disdain. They show the clear intention and action of the department to mislead, misrepresent, and pursue personal agendas. The proposal follows a pattern of misleading statements that can be traced back throughout previous rulemaking changes and pursued over the past few years. They stem from the department's utilization of these procedures to push through substantial shifts in the rules while deflecting attention to the cover of seemingly insignificant or minor adjustments. The very language of the brief summaries formally presented in the notification emails disseminated lay the groundwork for this deception. As an important note, I take objection to all the major aspects of this proposal. Submit my comments in writing, and I'll move to the third section, which I take a note with, which is you will note that nowhere in the brief summary presented by the state, nor in the notification emails, nor in the justification fact sheet is the subject of making changes to the emergency lease rules mentioned. The only language potentially referencing those significant changes states it is also intended to provide consistency with existing law. After a public health emergency occurring in 2024, my business felt strongly that the state had not sufficiently investigated the sources of a pathogenic outbreak. We conferred at length with the state to pursue additional sampling, testing, source tracking, and investigative measures, but the state refused to act. We deemed that our best option and prudent measure to protect the health of our consumers and the public at large was to pursue an emergency lease, allowing our market product to reside in a distinctly separate body of water without the potential of ongoing and uninspected upland pathogen sources. The department, however, took a singular stance that they needn't consider the potential risks to consumers when determining the grounds upon which to grant an emergency lease, which is a viewpoint in direct opposition to the very language laid out here in Chapter 2, 2.6, Section 1, where it clearly states the commissioner may grant an emergency aquaculture lease for shellfish when the health and safety of those shellfish or those of the consumer are threatened. Upon the department's denial of the emergency lease, without any consideration of this directive language or rationale given for ignoring it, we decided as a business to pursue the legal appeal process. Throughout months of assembling court filings and reviewing the state's stance, not once could they articulate the legality of the position they held, and they did not have that they did not have to issue a finding based on the inclusive language of Chapter 2. The blatant disregard for adherence to these rules and their arbitrary denial of relevance is dumbfounding. To now see the department attempt to sneak through changes to this portion of the rules in a thinly veiled attempt to retroactively change the language to support their position is an astonishing and troubling act. If the department feels that they can simply manipulate the very rules which govern us to cover up their shortcomings, we as growers will never have the ability to rely on the rules for the very guidance, boundaries, and opportunities they are meant to establish. The department does not provide a single word of justification for seeking these changes to the emergency lease rules. They do not cite a single conversation, study, incident, occurrence, or intention. In my understanding, the state has never once issued an emergency lease. From my direct experience pursuing this measure, it is my opinion that the state cowers in fear of what this portion of the rule lays out. We as growers are granted the opportunity to pursue a means of ensuring the health and safety of our products and the consumers. We are granted this at the broad discretion of the commissioner, but with a timeline and open opportunity that reflects the alacrity needed to enact swift changes to ensure prudence, safety, and public health. There are many stopgaps and constraints presented specifically in this portion of the rules, meant to set a high bar for approval and give the department authority to ascertain swiftly whether this measure is necessitated. The guardrails are in place, the limitations are already written, the process and structure are formed. Why change this now? Without a single word of justification. To specifically strike the entire paragraph that lays out the opportunity to extend an emergency lease beyond the initial 6 months granted is an incredibly brash move by the department. Without a single word of justification, the department feels they can ensure any instance requiring the utilization of an emergency lease will be nice and cleanly wrapped up in 6 months. At a time when the department is being shown to have failed even the most basic measures of ensuring public health through thorough shoreline surveys and transparent water quality monitoring, they feel that they can safely say a failed sewage treatment plant, a newly identified septic outflow, an upland contamination source, a viral or pathogenic outbreak, or the lasting effects of a natural disaster can be cleanly wrapped up in 6 months. At a time when the normal leasing process timelines are only growing longer and the backlog getting deeper, this department feels they can arbitrarily cut this language from the rules. I cannot fathom the ineptitude of removing this portion of the rules in this manner. In my particular instance, it took this department 13 months to even conduct the most basic upland survey of potential pathogenic contamination sources. And even then, that document was riddled with inaccuracies and blatantly false claims that they refuse to explain to this day. I don't think that this department can truly comprehend what it would look like to have to utilize an emergency lease. The infrastructure costs of installation, the gear costs of duplicate marking buoys, anchors, chains, lines, the labor costs of transitioning product, the planning and administrative costs of managing the process and communications with everyone involved, never mind the lost income and potential market loss from an incident. This is not some frivolous adventure to grab more growing space, and it is not to be taken lightly that this would have to be utilized by a grower. This is intended to be a last resort to find a safe transitional space for product that is in jeopardy, or as a measure of prudence and necessity to truly protect public health. This department cannot see this for what it is and comprehend the realities of this situation for a grower. They have no right to attempt to exclude its use. I implore every grower to engage in this process, take action to protect our rights for operating under these rules. I ask every industry, support group, organization, and business to offer scrutiny, feedback, and constructive guidance to bolster this process. I hope all of the legislators and committee members present will take this as a call to action that this department needs a thorough audit and determine how rule changes of this caliber can be so deceptively presented and administered. Thank you for your time.
If you do have things, I know you said you intended to submit.
I'll submit later digitally.
Everyone who has a written. All to have. Anyone else? For the last one, that's all. Okay.
Thank you. Catherine Lepner, Point Oyster Company. I'm sorry, you're Lippy. I would just implore, I do think the language behind the seed sourcing could be looked into further. I would also implore you to expand the definition to standard leases. They're held to similar standards as facilities and land-based facilities. So perhaps we could just expand the definition to hatcheries and or standard leases. And just piggybacking, the language in the emergency lease it's too vague. I would like to have some more clarification on how DMR defines within reason or whatever the particular wording is. But that is it for me. Thank you very much.
In the room, which is great. Thanks for actually speaking. You're driving here. For folks online, I know several of you, Mike, for example, your question started to get into a comment. So I'm hoping that folks online who want to comment will raise their hand. I've got Mike's hand. If you can take yourself off of mute, Mike. Yeah, I don't know if it works the same for you. I think the space bar can take you off of mute if you can't find the mute.
These buttons, I have them right now. When you flail, you flail. No, do it.
21. No luck? Okay, all right. Yeah, how'd you do it before? I'll let you keep working on it. If you figure it out, great. We'll go to Luke Sandin right now. If not, we'll get a written comment from you, Mike. Luke?
Hey everyone, my name's Luke Sandin. I work for The World is Your Oyster. I have a few LPAs. I don't have as much experience as some of the other folks in the room, but I'm concerned that the general changes to the language make things less specific and less clear and will lead to confusion and more problems. For example, the sources for LPAs would lead to, the department and the industry having less of an idea of what's actually happening, which seems dangerous. Same with the emergency leases. I feel like the old rules are clearer, more specific, and I don't understand the need to make things less well laid out. So it does seem like it's a little bit of a going in the wrong direction from a clarity point of view. So a little bit nitpicky, but that's sort of my first impression. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. Greg Foote?
Hey everybody, Greg Foote here from Freeport. My comments are on two different parts of this bill. First is the seed sourcing rules. As we heard here tonight, there's some pretty far-reaching ramifications for this rule that even in asking questions, we weren't able to get a clear and concise answer as to exactly how they would apply to different situations. For that reason, I'm not in support of the seed source rules as they're currently stated. Secondly, the emergency leasing is a real concern for me. I think Willie laid it out fairly nicely that the leases are not something, emergency leases rather, are not something that we take lightly, and the ability to have, or the ability to have that as a tool to protect public safety is of the utmost importance.
Okay. Are you all set? We lost you there at the end, but is that the end of your comment?
Yep, that's it.
Okay, great. Okay, sorry. Sorry, this seemed like a very quick stop and I was looking down. Okay, thank you, Greg. Jacqueline.
All right. Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to provide comments on the proposed amendments to Chapter 2. My name is Jacqueline Clark. I'm the co-owner of Nor'easter Oyster Company. And my comments are related to the proposals for Section 2.07, which extends the pre-application meeting requirement to prospective experimental leases. And I guess my comments are also related a bit to the pre-application process in general. Our farms operate in shared coastal spaces, and early conversations can and do absolutely help identify practical concerns, improve misunderstandings, and build relationships. And I appreciate the intent behind requiring pre-application meetings for standard leases and for this proposal to apply to experimental leases as well. However, I do have concerns about these pre-application meetings without clear guardrails, oversight, and protections for the applicants. This is based on personal experiences. The aquaculture lease process administered by the DMR is designed to evaluate proposals under specific statutory criteria. Pre-application meetings at the municipal level introduce a stage into the process where factors outside those established criteria could potentially come into play. Without clear structure and oversight, these pre-application meetings or even notice of them could unintentionally create opportunities for interference with prospective lease sites before an application is even formally submitted. This could include actions such as deliberate interference by a local official or a municipal resident with an applicant's ability to satisfy the Section 6072 conditions, or fostering organized local opposition based on misinformation. This undermines the fairness and consistency of the state-run leasing process and disadvantages new aquaculture entrants, small businesses, and working watermen and women who are just trying to earn a livelihood. I think the current rule and the proposal need some additional guidance. I urge the DMR to consider the following with respect to pre-application meetings as they exist for standard leases and as proposed for experimental leases. I believe that there needs to be state oversight in these discussions to ensure that discussions remain factual. There needs to be explicit language stating that proposed lease areas under active consideration are not subject to obstruction, harassment, or punitive local actions intended to preempt the state's review authority. Local municipal officials who deliberately interfere with a proposed lease site must be held accountable, and local municipal officials who facilitate the action of town residents to interfere with a proposed lease site must be held accountable, and there should be recognition of DMR's exclusive decision-making authority with the leasing process. Maine's aquaculture sector is an important and growing part of our working waterfront economy. Regulatory processes should encourage transparency and communication, but they must also protect the fairness, consistency, and integrity of the review system. Thank you.
And if you would submit your comments, it sounds like you have them in writing. If you wouldn't mind sending those along, that would be great.
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Odd. Oh, I'll come back to you, Mike. Oh, wait, Mike, are you off mute right now? Let's take advantage.
I'm off mute. I figured it out.
Okay, all right, sorry. Let's go with Mike Gaffney and then I'll call on Todd next.
Okay, my comments have to do with the part of the rulemaking that applies to sourcing for LPAs. And from this discussion, I can see that I think the department's focus is on entry-level farmers, small-scale farmers, LPAs, where the whole thing happens on the LPA. I just want to sensitize the department that for mid-size and larger oyster farms, LPAs are used as outbuildings in the same way that land agriculture, ranching, occasionally will bring their animals in off the field or the range, which in our case is the lease, but they have to move them into a different area, either a feed lot or they're bringing them in for vet treatment or for many other shearing or for many other purposes. So other stuff takes place outside the lease. And for medium and larger scale oyster farms, we use our LPAs, as I indicated, we use it as an area to to store market oysters in an ice-free area so that we can sell throughout the winter. Other farms use them to change their taste in preparation for market. And we use them as well to process the oysters. We bring them in off the lease. Our tumbler and our equipment is on an LPA. We bring them to the LPA, we process them, and we take them back out on the lease again. So, the law of unintended consequences could apply here. And the department's trying to fix something for the small farmer on the LPAs and screw it up for the medium-sized farmers. So I just want to caution you, that's how these LPAs, being able to move juvenile and adult oysters back and forth between lease and LPAs is a really important part of our operations, and we don't want you to screw it up. Thanks.
Todd. And could I get your last name too, Todd?
Yeah, it's Malloy, Molloi. I think I would echo some of Mike's comments around the ability to move oysters of various generations between both lease sites and LPAs. I don't know that I would see any exclusivity between them. And I think we all recognize the interest in having the original seed source come from these nurseries. So I think some clarity in that language is important, at least of which to clear up some of the confusion we witnessed here tonight. And in the interest of leaving some of the business process that everybody is currently using the LPAs for sort of undisturbed. I wasn't aware of the emergency lease provisions. I'm glad it was brought to the attention tonight. And I think that my comments would echo the fact that if you're going to have an emergency provision to protect public health and business growth and sort of business viability, then those emergency statutes should be able to be executed when the needs with which they present require them. So I think in addition to maybe the subtle changes trying to be made, I would encourage maybe further investigation to look at more comprehensive emergency measures, just given the fact that we're all raising a lot more sustainable seafood than we were 10 years ago. So I think the exposure we have with the general public is increasing exponentially, and having some viable ways to protect both our businesses and the public within DMR's regulations are important.
Thank you, Todd.
I also had a question about the what you mentioned, LD 2025. Is there a place we can read that? Do you have time to discuss those provisions tonight? Where do we learn more about that?
Sure. So that is a bill that's in front of the legislature currently. It had its public hearing last Thursday. You can find it on the main legislature website. If you search for LD 2025, it'll bring up the bill text as it was proposed, and probably all the testimony as well is available at this time. The committee hasn't scheduled a work session for that bill yet. I know it's not this week. It could be the following Thursday. They meet on Thursdays, but that'll be posted. The committee schedule will be posted on the legislative website if you want to track that. I'm not prepared to talk about it here tonight, but if you have any problems finding it, or if you have any questions after you look at it, you can reach out to me directly and I can talk with you about that.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the folks who have joined online? I don't see anybody on a phone, so I'm assuming that I don't need to tell anybody how to unmute off of that. I do want to remind folks, if you do decide you have a comment, you do have until February 23rd to submit those And again, those would be in writing, either by email, fax, or just in hard copy mail to the department. For those folks who haven't followed this type of rulemaking process before, we take all the comments that we received at this hearing and those that we receive in writing. We compile all of those. We talk internally about any changes to the rule that are necessary as a result of those comments. We provide a basis statement that explains what we are changing, or what we're changing based on those comments and why. All of that goes to the DMR Advisory Council, so they get a packet of all the public comments and the department's responses and what we chose to do as a result of those comments. And then they vote on the rulemaking before we can adopt it. So that, as I said, we don't have a meeting date scheduled, but I think that will happen the first or second week of March. Whatever we bring to them will be in that time frame. And then if they approve the rule, we file it with the Secretary of State's office, and then it's effective 5 days after that. So that's the process from this point forward. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight and for providing your comments. It is very helpful.
Can you just clarify, send them to rulemaking, not the
Okay, sure. So the address to send us comments is part of the rulemaking package. It's dmrrulemaking@maine.gov. So it is distinct from the aquaculture division. They're not the ones who should receive the comment, the rulemaking address. And then we, like I said, I'll take it from there. But thanks again.
You said this is recorded, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, how do you get a copy of that recording? Is there a you have to a FOIA, or how's that work?
Well, no, I wouldn't make you FOIA us for it, but I have to talk with our communications person, just the easiest way to share that file, because it does tend to be, it's almost 2 hour long recording. So it tends to be a large file. Let me figure out how we can share that.
Perfect, thank you.
Thanks everybody online.
You can spoil it.